Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a story that's sharp, simple, and honestly kind of mind-blowing. The tale of the sewing needle. Picture yourself huddled in a chilly cave, the wind howling outside like it's auditioning for a horror movie. Your breath puffs in the dim light of a flickering fire, and you're wrapped in a scratchy animal hide that barely keeps the cold at bay. Without something better to wear, you probably won't survive this Ice Age winter. Sorry, but that's the harsh truth. This is where the sewing needle, that tiny hero of human survival, first pricks its way into history. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'm curious where you're chilling tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're crouching in a Paleolithic cave, somewhere around 40,000 BC, where the air smells of damp stone and smoky embers. The ground beneath you is gritty, littered with flint chips and animal bones. You're surrounded by hunters, their hands calloused from skinning mammoths and scraping hides. Life here is raw. Every day is a gamble against cold, hunger, and predators with teeth the size of your forearm. You notice one hunter, let's call him Kale, hunched over a pile of fish bones, his fingers nimble despite the frost nipping at them. He's not just surviving, he's inventing. His breath clouds as he chips away at a tiny bone, shaping it into something revolutionary. You lean closer, squinting through the haze. That's no ordinary tool, it's the first hint of a sewing needle. This cave isn't just a shelter, it's a workshop of desperation. Mainstream history tells us that bone sewing needles, some as old as 40,000 years, have been dug up from sites like the Denisova cave in Siberia. These weren't fancy, just slivers of bone, polished smooth, with a hole at one end for threading sinew, but they changed everything. You watch Kale test his creation, poking it through a scrap of leather. It's slow, clumsy work, but it's a start. A quirky tidbit. Some of these early needles were made from bird bones, hollow and light, because apparently even cavemen appreciated a good lightweight tool. Probably the Paleolithic version of a carbon fiber gadget. You shift on the cold cave floor, your knees aching from crouching. Outside, the wind screams, and you can almost feel the snow piling up. Kale's not alone. Others in the cave are watching, curious. A woman nearby scrapes a hide with a flint blade, her fingers raw, but precise. She glances at Kale's bone needle, skeptical. Historians still argue whether these early needles were invented by one genius or popped up simultaneously across different groups, like some prehistoric light bulb moment. You can see why it's debated. Necessity is a brutal teacher, and humans were scattered across harsh landscapes, all facing the same icy problem. You're struck by how ordinary this feels, yet how monumental. Kale's not thinking about legacy, he's just trying not to freeze to death. You notice the firelight catching on his bone needle, its tip glinting like a tiny star. It's not much to look at, but it's about to rewrite survival. You can almost hear the hides rustling as they're pieced together, the first stitches of a warmer future. And yeah, if Kale tried to sell this on Etsy today, he'd probably get a 1-star review for too rustic. But in this cave, it's pure gold. You pull your hide tighter, imagining what's coming next, because this little tool is about to change the game.
You're still crouched in that Paleolithic cave, the fire's warmth barely reaching your toes as you watch Kale, the hunter, fiddle with his fishbone creation. The air's thick with the scent of singed fur and damp earth, and you can hear the distant drip of water echoing off the cave walls. Kale's hands, rough as the flint he's been knopping, move with a focus that makes you lean in. He's not just messing around, he's onto something big. That sliver of bone he's shaping, it's about to become the world's first sewing needle, and you're right there at ground zero. Kale picks up a fishbone, its surface slick from being handled. He's been at this for hours, you can tell. His fingers are cramped, and there's a pile of broken bone shards at his feet. You wince as he snaps another one, muttering something guttural that sounds like the caveman version of, "Are you kidding me?" He grabs another bone, this one from a trout he caught yesterday, and starts again. Using a sharp flint, he carves it down, smoothing the edges until it's thin and pointed. You're impressed, honestly. Try making a needle without a YouTube tutorial or a hardware store. Cale's got no instruction manual, just instinct and a whole lot of cold to motivate him. He pauses, squinting at the bone's blunt end. You see him pick up a tiny flint drill, no bigger than your thumb, and start boring a hole. It's slow, delicate work, and you're half expecting him to give up and chuck it into the fire. But then, success. A small, uneven hole pierces through. Cale threads a thin strip of animal tendon through it, testing the pull. You can almost hear his brain click. This is it. Mainstream archaeology backs this up. Excavations in places like the Kostenki site in Russia uncovered bone needles from 40,000 BC, some with holes so precise they rival modern craftsmanship. These weren't just tools, they were survival tech, born from trial and error in caves like this one. You glance around the cave, noticing others watching Cale. A kid nearby, bundled in a wolf pelt, mimics him, poking a stick through a scrap of hide. It's cute, but also a reminder, this isn't a solo act. The quirky thing? Some scholars think kids like this one might have helped refine needlemaking, playing around with bones and accidentally stumbling on better designs. Historians still argue whether the needle was a single eureka moment or a gradual group effort, with different clans tweaking the concept. You can see both sides. Cale's focus screams lone genius, but the kid's curiosity hints at a team effort. The fire crackles, sending sparks up to the cave's ceiling, and you feel the weight of this moment. Cale tests his needle again, pushing it through a piece of deer hide. It's not perfect, the hole's a bit ragged and the tendon keeps slipping, but it works. You imagine him grinning, though his face stays stone serious, probably because smiling in the Ice Age is a rare luxury. You can't help but think of how this would play out today. Some tech bro pitching Needle 1.0 on Kickstarter, promising to revolutionize fashion. But here, it's just Cale, a fishbone, and a dream of not freezing. You shift on the cave floor, your legs numb from crouching so long. The needle's done, but Cale's not stopping. He's already grabbing another bone, like he knows this is just the prototype. You can almost smell the leather he'll stitch tomorrow, the first step toward clothes that actually fit. It's wild to think this tiny tool, born in a smoky cave, is about to stitch its way into human history. And yeah, if Cale tried to patent this, he'd probably get sued by a saber-toothed tiger for intellectual property theft. You're still in that Paleolithic cave, the fire now a low glow, casting long shadows that dance across the jagged walls. The air's heavy with the musky scent of tanned hides, and you're watching Cale, the hunter, as he clutches his newly crafted bone needle like it's the key to everything. Spoiler, it kind of is. You can feel the cold seeping through your own hide wrap, and you're starting to get why Cale's so obsessed. Outside, the wind howls like it's got a personal grudge, and you know that without better protection, nobody in this cave is making it through the winter. That little needle in Cale's hand, it's about to become the MVP of survival. You watch as Cale hands the needle to a woman nearby, let's call her Mira, who's been scraping deer hides until her knuckles are raw. She eyes the needle skeptically, like it's some kind of Paleolithic prank. But Cale shows her how it works, pushing the bone point through a folded hide, pulling the sinew thread tight. The first stitch is wobbly, more zigzag than straight, but Mira's face lights up. You can almost hear her thinking, okay, this might actually work. She starts sewing two pieces of leather together, and soon she's got the start of a tunic. It's not haute couture, think lumpy, uneven seams, but it's a game changer. Those stitched hides will hug the body, trap heat, and keep the wind out. You're looking at the birth of real clothes. Mainstream history confirms this shift. Archaeological digs like those in the Swabian Jura caves in Germany show that by 40,000 BC, humans were using bone needles to create fitted garments. These weren't just random pelts anymore. They were tailored layers that let people hunt longer, travel farther, and survive harsher winters. You watch Mira pass the needle to another woman who starts stitching a child's hood. The cave feels different now, less like a tomb, more like a workshop buzzing with hope. A quirky tidbit, some of these early garments might have been decorated with beads or shells, because even Ice Age humans wanted a little bling. Imagine Mira rocking a leather jacket with shell studs, Paleolithic punk vibes.
You shift closer to the fire, your breath visible in the chill. The needle's magic is spreading. Another hunter tries his hand at sewing, cursing under his breath when the sinew snaps. You can't help but smirk. Guess even cavemen had to deal with thread tension issues. Historians still argue whether sewing spread because of trade or because different groups figured it out independently. You see both possibilities here. Cale's needle is a local hit, but you can imagine traders carrying the idea across valleys, swapping it for flint or furs. Either way, this cave is proof that necessity sparks ingenuity. You watch a kid tug at Mira's new tunic, giggling as he pokes at the stitches. It's sturdy enough to withstand his toddler chaos, which is saying something. The needle's not just saving lives, it's creating a future where people can move beyond surviving to thriving. You picture families wrapped in these new clothes, braving the snow to hunt or gather, no longer paralyzed by the cold. It's humbling, honestly. Today we'd throw a jacket in the wash without a second thought, but here, every stitch is a tiny rebellion against nature's cruelty. If Mira tried to sell her tunic on eBay, she'd probably get flagged for excessive wear. But in this cave, it's a masterpiece. You lean back, the cave's damp chill creeping into your bones. The fire's dying now, but the energy in the cave is alive. Mira's stitching faster, Cale's carving another needle, and you can feel the momentum building. This little tool, born from fishbone and desperation, is stitching together a warmer, stronger world. And yeah, if you tried sewing with one of these, you'd probably stab your thumb and cry. Good thing you've got a smartphone instead.
You're still in the flicker of that Paleolithic cave, but now you're stepping out, following the ripple of Cale's bone needle as it spreads beyond these damp walls. You trudge through snow-dusted valleys, your breath puffing in the icy air as you track hunters and gatherers carrying their stitched leather clothes and the know-how to make them. The world's a brutal place, with glaciers creeping like slow-motion bulldozers, but that tiny needle is threading its way across continents, stitching survival into human lives. You're not just in one cave anymore, you're seeing the needle's quiet conquest of the Ice Age. You pause at a windswept camp in what'll someday be France, where a group huddles under a rock overhang. A woman there, her hands chapped from scraping hides, is using a bone needle to sew a pair of boots. The needle's tip glints in the weak sunlight, and you notice it's not fishbone, but ivory, carved from a mammoth tusk. It's fancier than Cale's prototype, proof the idea's evolving. You watch her pull sinew through the leather, each stitch tight and deliberate. These boots aren't just footwear. They're freedom to cross frozen rivers or chase reindeer without losing toes to frostbite. Mainstream archaeology backs this up. Sites like Sunghir in Russia, dated to around 30,000 BC, unearthed graves with sewn garments, some adorned with thousands of ivory beads. These people weren't just surviving, they were flexing a little style. You move on, your feet crunching through frost, to a camp in what's now China. Here, another group uses needles made from bird bones, light as a feather, but strong enough to pierce thick hides. The quirky thing? Some of these needles were found alongside polished bone awls, hinting that sewing was part of a whole crafting culture. Call it the Paleolithic DIY scene. You can almost smell the smoky hides as a man stitches a hood, his fingers stiff in the cold. He's not reinventing the wheel or the needle, but he's clear the idea traveled far, maybe through traders swapping tools or clans merging after a good hunt. Historians still argue whether the needle's spread was a single cultural thread or a shared spark of desperation across humanity. You lean toward trade. People have always loved showing off a hot new tech, even if it's just a pointy bone. You squat by the fire in this camp, watching a kid mimic the adults, poking holes in a stick with a dull bone shard. It's not useful, but it's cute, like a caveman version of a kid doodling with a 3D pen. You notice the adults aren't just making clothes, they're sewing tents, bags, even slings to carry babies. The needle's versatility is wild. It's like the duct tape of the Ice Age. You picture Cale back in that first cave, probably clueless that his fishbone hack would become a global hit. If he knew, he'd probably demand royalties and mammoth steaks. Fair trade, honestly. You push further, to a coastal site where a group stitches sealskin kayaks. The needle's not just for fashion, it's for hunting, shelter, exploration. You can almost taste salt in the air as they sew, their needles darting through tough hide. It's humbling to see how one tool reshaped life across such different landscapes. Today, you'd scroll past a sewing tutorial on TikTok without blinking, but here, every stitch is a middle finger to the cold. And yeah, if you tried joining these folks, you'd probably tangle the sinew and get laughed out of camp. Good thing you're just observing. You settle by another fire, the stars sharp overhead. The needle's not just a tool, it's a story of human grit, passed from hand to hand, continent to continent. You feel the weight of its journey, knowing it's far from over. Those steel needles of the Middle Ages are still millennia away, but the bone needle is already weaving a legacy that'll outlast these glaciers. You're standing in a bustling medieval workshop now, the air thick with the tang of molten iron and the rhythmic clang of hammers. You've left the icy caves and bone needles far behind, fast-forwarding to the 14th century, where the sewing needle is getting a serious upgrade. You're in a grimy town, think muddy streets and chimney smoke, watching a blacksmith turned needlemaker hunched over a glowing forge. The needle's gone from fishbone to steel, and you're about to see how this shiny new version changes the game. Your cloak's flapping in the damp breeze, and you can't help but feel the hum of progress in this smoky, noisy world. You step closer to the workshop, where the needlemaker, let's call him Rowan, wipes sweat from his brow. He's shaping a thin rod of iron, heated cherry red, into a needle's point. His hands are steady despite the sparks flying like tiny fireflies. You watch him hammer the metal, drawing it out long and fine, then bore a precise eye with a delicate tool. It's not just craftsmanship, it's alchemy, turning raw ore into a tool so sharp it could pierce your ego. Mainstream history pins this shift to the Middle Ages, when metallurgy advancements, think of blast furnaces and better iron ore, made steel needles possible. By the 1300s, these were mass-produced in places like Nuremberg, turning sewing from a slog into an art. You glance at a pile of finished needles, glinting like miniature swords. They're sleeker than bone, stronger, and those tiny eyes can handle finer threads, like linen or silk. You picture Mira from that Paleolithic cave trying one of these. She'd probably trade her best mammoth hide for it. Rowan hands a needle to a seamstress nearby, who's stitching a velvet gown for some lord's daughter. The stitches are so tight and even, you'd need a magnifying glass to spot a flaw. The quirky tidbit? Some medieval needles were so prized they were stored in ornate cases, like jewelry, because nothing says fancy like flexing your sewing gear. You wander through the workshop, dodging apprentices hauling charcoal. Outside, you see tailors and housewives using these steel needles to churn out clothes faster than ever before. Tunics, cloaks, even early corsets are taking shape. And it's not just about warmth anymore, it's about status, trade, fashion. Historians still argue whether steel needles sparked the rise of tailored clothing or if demand for fancier garments drove needle innovation. You lean toward the needle leading the charge. After all, a good tool can rewrite the rules, like KL's bone needle did millennia ago. You pause by a market stall, where a merchant hawks needles alongside spices and cloth. They're cheap enough now that even peasants can afford them, which is wild. Back in the Ice Age, a needle was a family heirloom. You watch a young girl practice stitching, her fingers clumsy but determined. It's sweet, but also a reminder. Steel needles are democratizing sewing, letting more people make their own clothes. If Rowan tried selling these on Etsy today, he'd probably get 5 stars for game-changing durability, though someone would still complain about shipping. You settle on a bench, the town's bustle fading as you think about the needle's journey. From KL's fishbone to Rowan's steel, it's been a long road. You can almost hear the clink of needles in workshops across Europe, each one stitching a tighter, more connected world. And yeah, if you tried using one of Rowan's needles, you'd probably prick yourself and curse. Good thing you're just here for the story.
You're sitting now,
The medieval workshop's clang fading as you let the sewing needle's story sink in. Its journey from a fishbone in a frozen cave to a steel point in a smoky town. You're no longer tied to one place or time. You're drifting through the ages, tracing the needle's quiet role in human survival. The air around you feels softer, like the hush of a late-night story, and you can almost hear the faint prick of needles stitching lives together across history. This is where you reflect on the legacy of those stitches, the ones that kept us warm, made us bold, and wove us into who we are. You picture Cal's cave again, that first clumsy stitch pulling leather tight against the cold. You see Mira's tunic, patched and worn, keeping her family alive through another winter. You follow the needle's thread across continents, ivory in Europe, bird bone in Asia, sealskin in the Arctic. Each stitch a tiny act of defiance against nature's cruelty. Then you're back in Rowan's workshop, watching steel needles churn out gowns and sails, fueling trade and dreams of empires. The needle's not loud like a sword or flashy like a crown, but it's there, steady, threading humanity through ice ages and revolutions. Mainstream history shows this, from 40,000 BC bone needles to 14th century steel. The needle's been a constant, with finds in every major archaeological site, from Siberia to Spain. You lean back, the weight of it hitting you. The needle's not just a tool, it's a witness. It's seen humans crawl out of caves, build cities, sail seas. A quirky tidbit? In some ancient burials, needles were tucked beside the dead, like they'd need to stitch their way through the afterlife. Talk about packing light for eternity. You smile, imagining Cal's goose nodding approvingly at Rowan's steel upgrade. Historians still argue whether the needle's impact was practical or cultural. Did it just keep us warm, or did it spark creativity, identity, art? You see both. Every stitch was survival, but every bead or dye was a story, a way to say, "This is me." You close your eyes, picturing the needle today, still sharp, still threading lives. You think of your own clothes, the seams you never notice, holding you together as you move through the world. It's humbling how something so small carries such weight. You remember that kid in the cave, poking holes in a stick, or the medieval girl practicing her stitches. They're gone, but their work lives in every hem, every patch. If you tried to thank Kaal or Mira or Rowan, they'd probably shrug. Sewing was just life. But you know better. Without their needles, you'd be shivering in a hide, praying for spring. You feel sleep tugging at you now, the story settling like a warm blanket. The needle's legacy is quiet, but it's deep, stitched into the fabric of every life it touched. You imagine one last scene, a firelit cave, a medieval market, a modern tailor shop, all connected by that tiny, stubborn tool. It's not much to look at, but it's enough to keep the cold at bay, to keep us human. And yeah, if you tried sewing your own clothes, you'd probably end up with a lopsided scarf and a bruised ego. Good thing others carried the thread for you.
You're drifting now, the needle story fading into a soft, steady hum, like the whir of a distant sewing machine. Let your shoulders sink, your breath slow. Picture a quiet cave, the fire low, embers glowing like stars against the dark. You're wrapped in a stitched hide, warm, safe, the wind outside just a whisper. Feel the weight of those ancient stitches, each one a gift from hands long gone. Kail's, Mira's, Rowan's. They didn't know you, but they sewed for you, threading hope through time. Let the needle rest now. It's work done. The world's still turning, but here it's just you, the fire's soft crackle, and the calm of a story well told. Sleep's waiting, gentle as a folded cloth. Let it take you. Good night.